The morning of our divorce hearing, my husband walked into the courtroom like he was headed to a business meeting instead of ending a 12-year marriage. He didn't even look at me at first. He shook hands with his lawyer, straightened his tie, then leaned over just enough for me to hear him. By this afternoon, he whispered, that house will finally be mine. A woman sitting behind him let out a little laugh. I'd seen her picture before, so I knew exactly who she was. She smiled at me like she'd already moved into my life. "Hope you like apartment hunting," she said under her breath. I didn't answer either of them. I opened my canvas tote bag, pulled out a worn blue notebook with curled corners, and handed it to my attorney. "Please give this to the judge," I said. "Not yet. Wait until he starts asking about the house." My attorney nodded without opening it. 10 minutes later, the judge flipped through a few pages, stopped, read one entry again, then looked straight at my husband. The smile disappeared from my husband's face before the judge even spoke. Then the judge quietly said, "Mr. Collins, I think there's quite a bit you forgot to mention." At that moment, I knew the truth I'd been carrying for years was finally about to speak for itself. My name is Emily Collins. I'm 38 years old, and until that morning, I had never stepped inside a courtroom. I always thought divorce was something that happened to other people, not to the couple who painted their first apartment together and celebrated with takeout pizza because we couldn't afford furniture. When I met Ryan, he was funny, hardworking, and always talking about the future. I was a receptionist at a dental office, and he had just started working as an electrician's apprentice. We didn't have much, but we had plans. We promised we'd build a life together one paycheck at a time. For years, that's exactly what we did. I picked up extra shifts whenever money got tight. He worked long hours on job sites. We saved every tax refund, skipped vacations, and fixed up an old little house that everyone else said wasn't worth buying. Every wall we painted, every floor we replaced, every late-night trip to the hardware store felt like another step toward the life we'd dreamed about. Looking back now, I realize the cracks in our marriage didn't appear all at once. They showed up so quietly that I almost convinced myself they weren't there. By the time Ryan asked for a divorce, he had already rewritten our entire story in his mind. What he didn't know was that I'd been writing down the real one all along. Ryan and I bought the house when we were both 26. It wasn't the kind of place people dreamed about. The roof leaked over the laundry room, the kitchen cabinets were older than we were, and every window rattled when the wind picked up. Our families told us we were making a mistake. Ryan just squeezed my hand and said, "Give us a few years. We'll make this place beautiful." I believed him. We scraped together every dollar we had for the down payment. I emptied most of my savings, and he promised we'd always be partners, no matter who earned more. During the first few years, life wasn't glamorous. I worked full-time at the dental office and waited tables 3 nights a week. Ryan's apprenticeship paid less than we'd expected, so almost every extra bill landed on my shoulders. When the water heater died, I paid for the replacement. When the furnace quit during one of the coldest winters we'd ever had, I used my tax refund to replace it. Every month, I sat at our kitchen table with a calculator, a stack of bills, and a notebook. I wrote down every payment, every repair, every grocery receipt, and every dollar that went into the house because my dad had always told me, if you don't write it down, one day someone will tell you it never happened. At the time, I thought he was talking about budgeting. I had no idea those notebooks would someday become the most important thing I owned. As Ryan gained experience, his paychecks got bigger. He became a licensed electrician, then started taking side jobs on weekends. I couldn't have been prouder. I'd tell everyone, he's worked so hard for this. When he talked about opening his own electrical business, I encouraged him even though it meant more risk. We agreed I'd keep the steady paycheck and health insurance while he chased the bigger dream. For almost 3 years, that's exactly how we lived. My income paid the mortgage whenever business was slow. I covered our insurance, groceries, and property taxes more times than I could count. I never complained because I honestly believed we were investing in our future together. Then his business finally took off. Contractors started calling him instead of the other way around. He bought a new truck with the company logo on the doors. People around town knew his name. At first, success made him happier. Then it made him different. Dinner became something he ate while staring at his phone. Every conversation turned into numbers, bids, and new projects. If I asked whether we could spend a weekend together, he'd sigh and say, "You know I'm doing this for us." I wanted to believe him, so I kept believing him. The first time he forgot our anniversary, he blamed an emergency job. The second time, he didn't mention it at all. Little things kept changing. He started locking his phone. He stayed out later than usual. New shirts appeared in the closet even though we'd always shopped together. When I asked about them, he smiled without looking at me and said a client had given him a gift card. It sounded reasonable enough that I let it go. But something inside me started paying closer attention. One Friday afternoon, I stopped by his office to bring him lunch because he'd texted that he was too busy to leave. His truck wasn't there. One of his employees looked surprised to see me. "Didn't Ryan tell you?" he asked. "He left a couple hours ago." "For what job?" I said. The employee frowned. "There wasn't a job today. He said he had personal plans." I smiled, thanked him, and walked back to my car before the questions started catching up with me. That evening, Ryan came home carrying takeout like nothing had happened. He kissed the top of my head and asked how my day was. I looked at him for a long second before answering, "Busy." He smiled, completely unaware that, for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't sure if I still knew the man standing in my own kitchen. Over the next few weeks, I stopped asking questions and started paying attention. Every answer Ryan gave me sounded perfectly reasonable by itself, but when I put them together, they didn't fit. He said he had late appointments with clients, yet his employees told me most jobs wrapped up before 5. He claimed he was meeting suppliers, but the receipts I found in his truck were from restaurants 2 towns away. One Saturday morning, he said he had an emergency service call, but when I checked the company's Facebook page later that afternoon, it showed his crew finishing a community project without him. I still hoped I was wrong. After 12 years together, I wanted any explanation except the one my gut kept whispering. Then everything became clear by accident. My friend Melissa sent me a screenshot she thought I'd already seen. "Is this Ryan?" she texted. It was a picture from a local winery's social media page. Ryan was standing with his arm around a woman I'd never met. They were smiling at each other, not at the camera. The caption thanked everyone who attended a weekend couples event. I stared at that picture for nearly an hour before he came home. When he walked through the front door, I simply turned my phone around and placed it on the kitchen counter. He looked at the picture, then looked at me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he sighed and said, "I was going to tell you." Those 6 words hurt more than the picture itself. Not "I'm sorry." Not "it isn't what it looks like." Just, "I was going to tell you." He admitted he'd been seeing her for almost 8 months. According to him, we'd grown apart. He said he wasn't happy anymore and thought we'd both be better off moving on. I asked him one question. "When were you planning to tell me?" He rubbed the back of his neck and quietly answered, "After I got everything sorted out." I knew exactly what everything meant. 3 days later, I was served with divorce papers at work. My coworkers pretended not to notice when the receptionist handed me the envelope, but I could feel every pair of eyes following me back to my desk. That night, I met with a divorce attorney named Karen Ellis. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything, from the affair to the house. Then she asked one question that caught me off guard. "Who has been paying for the house over the years?" I shrugged. "Both of us." She smiled gently. "Not generally. Specifically." I went home and pulled the blue notebook from the kitchen drawer. Then I grabbed the older ones from the hall closet. One after another, I stacked them on the dining room table. There were notebooks going back almost 12 years. Every mortgage payment. Every repair. Every appliance. Every insurance bill. Every time I covered the payment because Ryan's business was slow. Even little notes beside certain entries. Ryan worried about payroll this month. Used bonus check for roof repair. Covered mortgage while business account was overdrawn. The next morning, Karen spent nearly 2 hours flipping through them. She finally looked up and smiled. Emily, most people tell the court what happened. You can show it. I frowned. They're just notebooks. She shook her head. No. They're a timeline. And timelines backed up by bank statements are hard to argue with. Over the next month, we matched every notebook entry with bank records, canceled checks, tax documents, credit card statements, and receipts I'd saved inside old folders. The story they told was simple. Whenever life got difficult, I carried the house. Whenever Ryan's business struggled, our home stayed afloat because my paycheck filled the gaps. I never thought of it as keeping score. I thought of it as being a wife. Meanwhile, Ryan became more confident by the day. Through mutual friends, I kept hearing the same thing. Ryan says the house belongs to him because he renovated it. Ryan says you'll probably have to move before summer. Ryan says his lawyer isn't worried. I never answered any of it. I just kept organizing my paperwork. By the time the hearing arrived, my evidence filled 3 neat binders, but the one thing I carried myself was that old blue notebook with the worn corners, the same notebook Ryan used to tease me about, saying nobody writes things down anymore. He had laughed at it for years. Neither of us realized it would one day become the reason his confidence disappeared inside that courtroom. The courtroom felt much smaller than I expected. Ryan sat at the table across from me in a dark suit I'd bought him for his brother's wedding years earlier. He looked relaxed, almost bored, while his attorney flipped through a thin stack of papers. Karen had 3 binders spread neatly in front of her. Ryan noticed them and smirked. That's a lot of paperwork for a house, he whispered as I sat down. Before I could answer, the woman from the winery slipped into a seat behind him. She crossed her legs and gave me a polite little smile that somehow felt worse than an insult. When the hearing began, Ryan's attorney stood first. Your Honor, Mr. Collins has been the primary force behind the value of this property. He renovated the home, expanded his business from the property, and substantially increased its worth through his labor and investment. Ryan nodded along with every sentence. Then came the line I'd been expecting. Mrs. Collins made routine household contributions, but the property's current value is overwhelmingly the result of Mr. Collins's efforts. Routine household contributions. 12 years reduced to 4 words. Karen stood calmly. Your Honor, we'd like to submit a documented financial timeline before discussing the property. She handed the blue notebook to the bailiff along with the binders. The judge opened the notebook first. I watched his expression change as he turned the pages. Every page was dated. Every entry was written in the same careful handwriting. Mortgage payment, Emily paycheck. Furnace replacement, Emily tax refund. Roof repair, Emily overtime bonus. Property taxes, Emily account. He looked up. Mrs. Collins, did you keep this record continuously? Yes, Your Honor. For how long? Since the month we bought the house. Ryan shifted in his chair for the first time. The judge continued turning pages. Some entries had little notes beside them. Ryan's business slow this month. Covered full mortgage. Paid insurance while waiting on client payment. Used savings for electrical panel upgrade. The judge set the notebook down and opened the first binder. Karen spoke quietly. Each notebook entry is matched to the corresponding bank statement, canceled check, or receipt. Ryan's attorney stepped forward. Your Honor, keeping a personal notebook doesn't prove ownership. No, the judge said, tapping the binder. But matching financial records often prove something. He pulled out a bank statement. April 2018. Mortgage payment from Mrs. Collins's account. Another page. September 2019. Property tax payment from Mrs. Collins's account. Another. January 2020. Heating system replacement charged to Mrs. Collins's credit card. Ryan leaned toward his attorney and whispered urgently. The confidence he'd walked in with was fading fast. Then the judge found an entry that made him pause. He read it twice before looking directly at Ryan. Mr. Collins, according to these records, there were 7 months during the first 3 years of your business when Mrs. Collins paid the entire mortgage herself. Is that accurate? Ryan cleared his throat. My business was still getting established. So the answer is yes? Yes. The judge nodded and turned another page. These records also show Mrs. Collins paid for the roof, the furnace, the property taxes, and multiple major repairs. Ryan tried to recover. I did most of the renovation work myself. I'm not questioning your labor, Mr. Collins, the judge replied. I'm trying to understand why you testified that the house was primarily supported by your contributions. The room went completely quiet. Even the woman behind him stopped smiling. Karen slid one final document across the table. It was a refinancing application from years earlier. The judge read the highlighted section aloud. Purpose of refinance: reduce monthly expenses while husband launches electrical business. He looked at Ryan. Your wife's income was used to qualify for this refinance. Ryan stared at the table. The judge closed the notebook gently, almost carefully, like it mattered. Then he looked at both attorneys. I believe we need a much more detailed review of the financial history before making any decision about this property. Ryan's attorney asked for a recess. The judge agreed, but before he stood up, he glanced at the notebook one more time. Mrs. Collins, he said, most people walk into court with opinions. You walked in with a 12-year timeline. Ryan didn't look at me when the judge left the bench. He just sat there staring at the same blue notebook he used to laugh about at our kitchen table. 3 weeks later, we were back in the same courtroom. During that time, a court-appointed financial reviewer had gone through everything: our mortgage records, tax returns, bank statements, credit card payments, loan documents, and every receipt Karen had organized from my notebooks. I hadn't heard much from Ryan except one message asking if I wanted to work something out before the next hearing. I never answered. If we were finally dealing with the truth, I wanted it to happen in the courtroom, not over text. When the judge entered, everyone stood, and the room became quiet. He opened a thick report and looked toward both tables. The court has completed its review of the financial records, he said. The documentation confirms that Mrs. Collins made substantial financial contributions to the purchase, preservation, and maintenance of the marital home throughout the marriage. Ryan's attorney shifted in his chair. The judge continued. The records further show that during several periods when Mr. Collins's business produced little or no income, Mrs. Collins's earnings covered the mortgage, insurance, taxes, utilities, and multiple major repairs necessary to keep the property. He turned another page. These contributions were not isolated. They were consistent over many years. Ryan slowly lowered his head. The judge looked directly at him. Mr. Collins, during the previous hearing you described these contributions as routine household expenses. Ryan swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. Having reviewed the evidence, I disagree with that characterization. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then the judge explained that the house was a marital asset built through the efforts of both spouses, not one person's success story. Any final division would reflect the actual financial history instead of assumptions or selective memories. It wasn't dramatic. No one slammed a folder. No one shouted. But I could almost hear the weight of 12 years settling into that room. Ryan's girlfriend quietly picked up her purse and walked out before the hearing was even over. She never looked in my direction. A few minutes later, the judge finalized the decision. I would receive a fair share of the home's equity based on the documented facts, and the remaining assets would be divided according to the verified financial record. He closed the file and simply said, "This court values evidence over recollection." That was the end of it. Outside the courtroom, people drifted toward the elevators. Karen shook my hand and smiled. "You did exactly what you needed to do." As I thanked her, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Ryan. He looked older than he had just a month earlier. He kept his hands in his pockets and stared at the floor before speaking. "I forgot how much you carried," he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. He gave a small, tired laugh. "No, that's not true. I didn't forget. I just stopped thinking about it because it made it easier to believe everything belonged to me." For the first time since our marriage ended, he sounded honest. "I'm sorry, Emily." I looked at him for a moment. "I never wanted to take anything that wasn't mine." He nodded. "I know. I just didn't want the years to disappear." He wiped at his eyes and whispered, "They didn't." Then he turned and walked toward the parking lot. That was the last conversation we ever had. A few months later, I used my share of the settlement as the down payment on a small townhouse across town. It wasn't fancy. The walls were plain, the kitchen was tiny, and there wasn't a big backyard. But every room felt peaceful because it belonged to the life I was building instead of the one I was trying to hold together. The old blue notebook still sits in the top drawer of my desk. I don't use it to keep score anymore. I keep it because it reminds me that the quiet things we do for the people we love still matter, even if no one notices at the time. Sometimes the truth doesn't need the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it just needs someone who cared enough to write it down. A year later, I drove past our old house by accident. The flower beds I'd planted were gone, and the porch swing Ryan and I built together had been replaced. For a second, I expected to feel sad. Instead, I smiled and kept driving. That house had been where I spent years proving my love to someone else. My new home was where I finally started proving something to myself. I finished the business classes I'd put off for years, earned a promotion at work, and stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own life. Looking back, I don't think the judge changed my future. The notebooks didn't either. They simply made the truth impossible to ignore. The real turning point came the day I stopped trying to convince someone of my worth and started believing it myself. If you're carrying more than your share while someone keeps telling you it doesn't count, don't let the years disappear. Keep your records. Keep your self-respect. And never assume that quiet sacrifices don't matter just because they're made behind closed doors. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. If it touched you or reminded you of someone you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about quiet strength, family, and truth finding its way to the surface, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more.